It's the biggest audience for the show of the year, I'll warrant. Certainly it felt that way on social media, and why not? It's been the mother of all weeks at Westminster, and we'll be surveying the scene and looking forward to what might happen next. I can do so from the vantage point of having spent almost 30 years in the House of Commons and having seen the defenestration of several political leaders. And that seems to be what we are facing now. But that's not the only subject on the order paper. We'll be talking about the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty, who's been visiting Britain. Aren't we doing well? Aren't we doing well as the fifth largest economy in the world? And 40 years plus membership of the fabulous European Union, the United Nations are sending us rapporteurs to investigate the state of extreme poverty in the nation. Particularly, I want to concentrate this evening on children. If I tell you that in 2018, in the world's fifth biggest economy, a member state of the European Union, almost 1 in 2 children in Britain are poor. That's right. Almost 1 in 2 are poor. 1.5 million people in Britain, according to the United Nations rapporteur, are living in destitution. Let me spell that out. Destitution. We're hoping to catch the author himself, the rapporteur himself, just before he gets back on a plane to New York to deliver the dread news to the United Nations itself. We'll also be talking about the death of the kilo. Turns out that the kilo that we use as the standard measure, has, by some wear and tear mysterious to me, lightened by the weight of an eyelash, and therefore will have to be replaced because, of course, well, these measurements have got to be right. Now, I confess, as a man of my age and class, I have absolutely no idea about kilos or grams or kilometres or metres or any other metric, which is quite difficult when you're in the car with young children who know nothing but metric and a foreign wife who knows nothing about imperial, except that our country was a colony of an empire for, well, a couple of 100 years. So I'm not suggesting it will be easy to convert you. But here's my take. When we Brexit, we should go back entirely to imperial measures. Hotel California, I suppose we could play. And let me tell you this, it's 7:09 and 11 seconds. Good time to tell you, my Kickstarter.com for my film, Killing Kelly, on the strange death of David Kelly, is now open for business. Go to it in the course of this 3 hours, and we'll keep you updated as to how it's going. I'll be making that film with John White, my old friend that's a frequent guest on the show. He'll be doing the script. My old friend Sean Murray, the celebrated and award-winning Irish director, co-directing the film, and I'll be making it with 2 of my former guests on here, Miles Goslett and the former Liberal Democrat government minister, Norman Baker. Killing Kelly on Kickstarter.com. Go to it, please. You'll find it on Twitter also. But let me start, if I may, with what has happened. And that wasn't a pun. I've got the Times in front of me, which I think captures the story best in today's newspapers, though other brands are available. The Times, above, a kind of haggard picture, and hasn't she aged, of the Prime Minister, carries this headline: Lonely May staggers on. Bullet points: PM savaged as ministers quit over Brexit. Bullet point: Tory rebels call for leadership vote. Bullet point: Gove on brink after rejecting new job. Let me start with the last one first. Michael Gove, I consider, on a personal level, a friend of mine. You've heard me say that before. I make no apology for it, and I don't let other people pick my friends. But Michael Gove rejecting the Secretary of State for Brexit position was a matter of acute calculation by him. I stress I haven't spoken to him. This is just my knowledge of him and of this situation. The reason Michael Gove turned down the Brexit Secretaryship of State, which has gone to someone whose name has already escaped my memory. Steve Wright, is it, in the afternoon? Stephen Barclay. I have no idea who he is, and neither do you, if you're being honest. But Gove turned it down, but he hasn't resigned from the cabinet, and here's why. He hasn't resigned from the cabinet because there is about to be a leadership challenge in the Conservative Party. 48 letters are already in, I can tell you. And far more than 48 will be in over the next 72 hours or perhaps a little more. So, Michael Gove's calculation, and he is a supreme calculator, is that he'll get some brownie points for not abandoning the sinking ship of Theresa May, and he will be, he hopes, the strongest pro-Brexit candidate left standing. He pledged his loyalty, but it was, in a way, a pledging of his disloyalty. He intends to be a runner, and he might win, and he's a very clever man. He may be the cleverest of all the Tory candidates that are in the race. Of course, the Tory MPs that are piling in now, Remainers as well as Leavers, by the way, are determined to repeat what happened in Margaret Thatcher's day. So let me go back to those days. I was there. The corridors of power were filled with hard-faced men with wet cheeks, literally tears in their eyes, including ministers like Malcolm Rifkind, like Kenneth Clarke, and others who had been in and told the Prime Minister to her face that they could not see how she could survive. I remind you, given what you've just heard Lord Heseltine say on the news, isn't he a paragon of a man to give advice on loyalty to his leader and not challenging sitting prime ministers? He was clucking that Mrs. May will win the no confidence motion vote. And of course she will. So did Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher won the no confidence vote. But so many votes had been cast against her that it became untenable, incredible, in the literal sense of the word, for her to continue. And her prime ministership was at an end. And then her wet eyes were just visible, because cameras weren't as good then as they are now through the back seat window of that car. I believe the same thing will happen before I address you again next Friday on the mother of all talk shows. Let me turn briefly, because time is my enemy, to the vote on the deal. There will be many who reject the deal because they want to stay in the European Union with whistles and bells on. And they sense that from this turmoil of a failure of the May Brexit deal to pass in the House, some straw might emerge onto which they can clutch and save their beloved membership of the EU. There are others, scores of others, who will reject the deal because they say it means no Brexit at all. In fact, they, like me, let me put my cards on the table, believe that actually we'd be better off staying in the European Union than to exit it on the terms that Mrs. May has negotiated. This is not Brexit in name only. This is worse than staying in the EU for the following reasons. It would establish us for the first time in 1,000 years, 1,000 years, as a vassal state. Everyone's using that term now. Go to your dictionary and see its definition. It means a nation which is subordinate to other nations. That is to say, those other nations can tell it what to do. That's worse than where we are now, because at least where we are now, we have, albeit a lesser crew, sitting in the European Parliament. We have ministers, albeit oftentimes less than adequate, sitting at the table when the EU decisions are being made. Under May's Brexit deal, we will have neither. No members of the European Parliament, no seat at the European councils, yet obliged, and here's the point, potentially forever, to take the rules that the European Union gives us. Why do I say that? Because the only way that we can leave it under the May terms, which are worse than Chequers, by the way, by a country kilometre, they're worse than Chequers, is by the joint agreement of the EU and us. Well, what if the EU never agrees? Never. What if it says no, 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 to coin a phrase that General de Gaulle once used? Put an N on the end of that. No, no, no. You may not leave the single market. You may not leave the customs union. Therefore, the so-called backstop in which the whole of the United Kingdom, in fact, will be entwined with the European Union is potentially forever. That's before I go into issues of fisheries and so on, which I could, and which Michael Gove is staying on to do his best to turn the tide on. The reality is, we are not leaving the EU if Mrs. May's negotiated deal goes through. But it's not going to go through. It cannot go through. The numbers don't add up. Because Labour will resolutely vote Mrs. May down. So will the SNP. So will the DUP, imagine. So will the Liberal Democrats, if there are any left by then. And so will at least 50 Conservative MPs. Do the maths. Mrs. May depends every day for her parliamentary majority on any matter on the 10 MPs of the DUP. So this cannot pass, will not pass. And thus the whole country will be pledged and plunged into absolute political stasis. There are several ways that stasis could be broken. The best one, by far, is for Her Majesty to decide that only the country itself can rule on where Britain goes next. General election now. That's what I say. That's what I hope she'll say. But I want to hear what you say. 0344 499 1000, or email me via the website at talkradio.co.uk, or text me, texting the word talk followed by your message to 87222, but that will cost you 25p. That's 12pence halfpenny, plus normal charges. Or you can tweet me for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. Tweet me, text me, email me, but above all, call me 0344 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you back, and it will therefore cost you hardly anything at all. Now, just to show I can reach out across the lines, let me tell you that my next guest is also like the aforementioned Michael Gove, something of a friend of mine. At least I've met him many times and we got on famously. And I've got to say before I introduce him, he's doing the right thing. He doesn't know quite how he should vote on Mrs. May's Brexit deal. So he's asking his constituents. He's the MP for Shrewsbury, Tory MP for Shrewsbury, Dnoald Kawczynski. Daniel, welcome.
Good evening, and may I say it's also been a great pleasure in interacting with you always, despite our strong political differences.
Thank you, Daniel. There's no reason why political differences need to involve personal enmity. I've always said that. And anyway, when I was a Labour MP, I regarded the opposition as sitting in front of me and the enemy sitting all around me.
How true.
which,
How true.
Which Jeremy Corbyn later learned. Anyway, Daniel, this is quite novel. It's almost Soviet, if you don't mind me saying so. You're going to have what? Town hall meetings across the constituency, take the temperature of public opinion and then decide? Tell us.
Yes, well, I was unsure when Cameron was renegotiating our relationship with the European Union, and he brought back the renegotiation. I was not convinced. I felt it was a fig leaf, and it didn't address the concerns of my constituents. But nevertheless, I went out at that time, and we had a lot of public meetings, and we tried to gauge how people felt themselves in Shrewsbury. At the end of the day, a Member of Parliament will want to try to keep his constituents on side, and so engaging with them to try to get their understanding of fundamentally important issues like this is very, very important. At the time, we came to the conclusion that his renegotiation was not sufficient to meet the needs and the concerns of my constituents in Shrewsbury. That's why we campaigned for Brexit. Now, the litmus test for this deal will be, can we sell it to the electorate in my constituency? And so hearing from them at first hand how they feel, whether they are running businesses that trade with the European Union, whether they voted UKIP in the past or for the Conservative Party and have the European issue at the forefront of their thinking, it's very, very important to engage.
And how's that going so far?
Well, last night I met with started off with my senior councillors who are there, obviously working every day on behalf of local residents. I wanted to spend the evening with them to hear how they felt. Not surprisingly, I think my councillors are just as divided on this issue as our residents, as is the country. We have heard so far, just today, anything from a demand for another referendum to a demand to reject the deal and go to WTO terms with a no deal. So there's a vast spectrum out there of views, and I think it's going to be hugely important for all members of Parliament to try to understand the thinking in their own constituencies before we decide to vote on what certainly for me is the most important single issue that I would have voted on in my 13 years as a Member of Parliament.
Oh, for sure. And that vote will be before Christmas, won't it?
Well, I hope so, and I expect so. I would be very surprised if it didn't come before December the 20th. I think the Prime Minister wants to put this to bed before the new year.
Who will the Prime Minister be on December 20th?
Look, I have not put in a letter, and nor do I intend to. I don't believe in changing the team captain at this very, very important and delicate moment in the whole negotiating process. I hope...
Unless the team captain, as Geoffrey Howe said, is pulling up the stumps and breaking the bats.
Well... If you want to get into cricketing metaphors, look, I've said what I've said. There are Tory MPs, as you know, who are putting in letters. They believe that the Prime Minister has, reneged on some of the promises that she made to the ERG, of which I'm a member. Of course, I would love to have the purest form of Brexit, the sort of Brexit that I campaigned for, to regain all of our sovereignty straight away in one swoop. But the reality is, this argument is very finely balanced, and you know the old expression, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
If it's a bird, yeah.
Some people say, let's get across the finishing line. Let's get across the finishing line with as minimum disruption as possible to businesses that actively trade with the European Union, and then continue to evolve that relationship over the coming years. Now, I don't know how you feel, but I know I'm really torn on how to vote on this, and that's why I'm seeking the views of my constituents.
But not on the leadership itself. You'll be voting for Mrs. May.
Well, I will be if there is a vote of confidence in her, if they secure the 48 letters, and there is a vote of confidence, then I will be backing the Prime Minister. Yes.
Okay. Now, when will all that happen, Daniel? As it happens, I'm told by someone who should know that there is 48 and more than, and therefore the vote is triggered. When would it be? Will it take place over one day in the House, members going up to the corridor, up to the committee room, and casting their vote throughout the day, and therefore will that be next week?
Well, I don't really particularly want to speculate on whether or not they've reached the 48. I mean, there is also speculation that the numbers have not been as forthcoming as some of the members anticipated. However, if they do reach the 48, Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, will make an announcement that the prerequisite number has been reached of MPs calling for a vote of confidence, and then he will outline the exact steps which he will have to put into force, and they will have to be, I think, a very, very short process, and maybe even a sort of short-circuited process from what we've normally experienced in terms of selecting a party leader, given the serious nature and the fact that time is running out. I very much hope it doesn't come to that, though. I hope that some of my colleagues, despite their frustrations, despite their concerns that the Prime Minister has not got them everything that they want, I hope it doesn't come to that.
Well, here's a tweet for you. Let me read it out to you from Murphy. Daniel's constituents voted to leave the EU. He doesn't need to consult them. If he wants to represent them, he has to vote the abominable May deal down. I don't know if Mr. Murphy is a constituent of yours, but that's directly bowled at you, Daniel.
Perfectly fair analysis. But at the end of the day, what he hasn't outlined is that, of course, in my constituency, the vote was extremely close, as it was throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. I think 53 to 47 in our case, in my constituency, and of course, nobody voted for a Brexit which would not try to minimize the disruption to our economy and to many businesses. Some of the people that I will be contacting, that I've already been meeting over the last few weeks, are actually companies, big companies in Shrewsbury that actively export to the European Union and have just-in-time supply chains of products coming from the European Union. And of course, there are very strong voices coming from businesses and people, wealth creators like that, who don't want us to crash out without a deal, and want us to try to bring about something which will guarantee and safeguard our ability to trade with the European Union. Now, may I just say that I think that the concerns of leaving without a deal and going to WTO terms are rather exaggerated. We do trade with the United States of America, which is our single largest trading partner on WTO terms. America as a country is our single biggest trading partner. And a lot of companies say, well, actually, in reality, what we'll do is we will adapt ourselves to trading with the European Union on WTO terms and filling out the forms and the paperwork and paying the tariffs as we currently do with our businesses when exports go to America and Canada and other countries. But of course, the reality is, as you know, the myth and the sort of, how can I put it, the sort of, not the myth, but it's a sort of more of the narrative. The narrative is such that there is still enough concern and disquiet on this issue for us not to completely discount the need for some sort of compromise in the short to medium term with this agreement that the Prime Minister is putting forward.
Well, from my point of view, we should have spent the last 2 years on an optimistic front foot, putting the argument that you have just done, that in fact we trade with almost everyone else in the world on WTO rules. We have big customers like the United States that we trade with on WTO rules, and the rest of the world trades with the European Union on WTO rules. We who believe in Brexit have allowed the ogre, the spectre of so-called crashing out to seem like Dunkirk.
And it is, of course, and I'm speaking now to you as the first ever Polish-born British Member of Parliament, and I'm already starting to see, when I go back to Poland, I see the extraordinary levels of interference in that country from the European Union. Many of these countries, actually, their citizens don't want to abandon their national currency. In the latest opinion poll in Poland, 71% of the electorate don't want to give up their currency, the zloty, but of course they are all contractually obliged to join the Eurozone. There's only one country with a permanent opt-out from the Eurozone, as you know, when we pull out, and that's Denmark. So this organization is rapidly moving towards a supranational state with a single flag, single president, single European Parliament. Now they're talking about a single European army.
Yeah, they told us we were lying when we raised that point.
They told us we were lying. And when I was speaking to the Oxford Union a few months ago about this issue, the students sort of looked at me in disbelief. Why are you trying to, misrepresent the situation about the single European army? It's not going to happen. Now, of course, this week we hear from Monsieur Macron and Frau Merkel that they are absolutely going to create a single European army. So a single European army, single currency, single parliament, single president, single EU flag. And of course, this is not what we want. We want, as Britons, we want a strong relationship with our European partners. We want to be protecting one another through NATO, which is hasn't lost a square inch of territory since its inception 70 years ago, but as independent sovereign nations. And I think that for us, it had to be Britain, didn't it? It had to be Britain that had the courage and the fortitude to actually stand up against this project and say, look, sorry, we know we've invested £692 billion in this project of British taxpayers' money since we joined, but we are not comfortable with the direction of travel. And that is why we're getting off. Yeah,
the moot point, Daniel, is whether we are getting off with Theresa May's deal. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg, your chairman of your ERG, of which you're a member, he was very clear in the House when more or less announcing that he was sending his own letter of no confidence. You're not tempted by his arguments?
Well, as I say, I am taking soundings throughout the whole of the weekend from my association. I feel that my association, and I listen to them keenly, are a little bit reticent about trying to have a leadership contest. By the way, I don't think they have the numbers to topple the Prime Minister either. And if they were to have, as you know, the rules state that if they were to have this confidence vote and the Prime Minister won, then she is safe for another 12 months.
I remember, because I was there before you, Daniel, yeah. I remember when Mrs. Thatcher won her no confidence motion.
In 1989, that's right.
It didn't save her. Depends how many people vote against you, as you know.
Yes. But look, I just want to say that this is such a difficult issue because I don't believe that the agreement satisfies everything that we voted for, and I believe that we are particularly over the backstop issue, and particularly over the fact that we will not be able to implement some of these trade deals that we've been working on straight away in the transition period and thereafter. Of course, these are huge frustrations, and there will be many of our constituents who are really disappointed and sometimes very angry that these compromises are being made. I haven't decided how to vote, but please don't think for a moment that I have ruled out for a second voting against this deal and actually us ultimately ending up with WTO. What I will refuse to do, and I've come in from a lot of pressure. You, when you were a member of Parliament, came under huge pressure, I remember, from many corners. But this campaign to try to force us into another referendum, that's something that's never going to fly with me. We had the referendum. 17.4 million people voted in unprecedented numbers. And if we were to have another referendum which potentially overturned that previous decision, then I think the disconnect between citizens and politicians would be even greater.
Dangerous. Would be dangerous.
And it would be dangerous. And I have to say, there are people who, there are people who have never accepted the result and who want to use this to try to overturn the result. And Mr. Tusk, the European Commission president, said, well, of course, just in his interview, well, of course, the best option is that Britain actually doesn't pull out. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are people both in Brussels and in the United Kingdom who hope and expect and are working towards having this decision overturned. Well, every time the people of any European country have had the temerity to challenge the European Union, be that the people of Denmark or France or Ireland, they have always been told, no, you've got this wrong. You voted the wrong way. You need to vote again until you carry on voting until you get it right. Well, they've picked the fight with the wrong people this time. We are going through with the decision. We're pulling out on the 29th of March next year, and that is absolutely critical, not only to our own standing as a country, but also the integrity of the whole process by which our democracy functions.
Daniel, you're a gentleman. Thank you for your time. Dnoald Kawczynski, the Conservative MP for Shrewsbury. This is the mother of all talk shows. 0344 499 1000. Now we're talking about Theresa May, about the leadership challenge. By the way, in reference to a tweet I had earlier, the BBC are not lying when they say it's 23. There's 23 named, photographed, publicly declared letters. But as I said earlier, I have an unimpeachable source who tells me that the 48 has already achieved and that by Monday it'll be well above that. I don't demur, actually, from what Daniel said, that the majority of Tory MPs would vote for Theresa May. But then the majority voted for Margaret Thatcher. But it didn't save her. Let's hear from Paul in Slough. Go ahead, Paul.
Good evening, George. How
Evening,
are
sir.
you?
Yeah, good. I'm in fighting form.
Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I'm white and English, but I can still say those words, can't I?
Yes, you can, of course. It just means peace be upon you.
Exactly. And
I wish it back. I wish it back to you.
Spread is love and, the word of love and peace and living as one together.
Indeed. Shalom.
Salam alaikum.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. When you were on TalkSport, Alan Brazil's breakfast show yesterday or the day before,
yes, I loved it.
Wrong, wasn't it?
Sorry?
Your prediction was wrong.
Tell me why? Why was it wrong?
Because you said that Theresa May would be gone by the end of that day.
No, I said she could be gone by the end of that day. Give me a day. Give me a day or two leeway. I said that she'd be challenged, and she is.
She has been challenged, yeah.
I have been wrong before, Paul. I was wrong in 1978 at least once, but I certainly wasn't. I certainly wasn't wrong about
you in many ways.
I certainly wasn't wrong about Theresa May being challenged for the leadership. Go ahead.
No, she will be challenged, but I would have thought she would have been challenged by Michael Gove, but he's standing by her, isn't he?
No, he will be a challenger. I'm sure about that. But
I think they're all queuing up behind her.
Do you think so?
I think they're all queuing up behind her to stab her in the back.
An important qualification. I must say I laughed when I heard Michael Heseltine on the news, all very stentorian, Churchillian, about how everyone must stand by the leader. He, of course, destroyed Margaret Thatcher's leadership.
Exactly. Now, can I give you a quick poem, George?
Yes, very quickly.
It's called Life After the End.
Okay.
When I was 1, the war had begun. When I was 10, it was wartime again. When I was 20, I thought I knew plenty. When I was 30, I liked to be flirty. When I was 40, I got rather sporty. When I was 50, I turned very thrifty. But now that I'm 60, I've got to confess that more often than not, I could not care less.
Well, I think that's a splendid poem. Thank you, Paul, in Slough. Let me go to David in London. Go ahead, David.
Hi, George. Yeah, I think you should go for the Poet Laureate's job's coming up soon, isn't it?
It is.
Put him in for that.
And Zephaniah has turned it down, so there's a definite vacancy.
But listen, what I've been fascinated about recently, very, very recently, is quite straightforward. Do you not think it would be much more... I mean, when Rees-Mogg, credit to him, he stood up and he put in the resignation, and he publicly put in the resignation.
Yes, to our face.
To fair play to him. But no, do you not think it's a little bit too... He should have held his fire. But really, the Tories should be waiting until after the defeat in the Parliament before they go for the confidence vote.
Well, on one level, yeah, but they still hope the ERG, the Rees-Mogg group, of which Daniel's a member, but not obviously taking their whip, they still feel that they can avert that defeat because they're afraid that defeat might lead to a second referendum. If Parliament were to vote for one, the government would be more or less bound to implement it. Now, I don't believe there's a majority for that.
No, but listen, I have to be honest with you now. I mean, I stand only second to you in my disdain of Blair. But nevertheless, sitting there and making my skin kind of crawled with where Blair was saying, well, we won't accept this. And I'm thinking, I'm agreeing with him, and I'm not happy about that because obviously we know the war criminal that he is. And
what we know is that he, like many others, want the May's Brexit deal to crash so that the whole issue can be reopened. And I don't believe that there is a majority for that, but I believe a very significant number of Labour MPs under the influence of Mr Blair would vote for it, and some Tory MPs would vote for it, but the bulk of Labour MPs and the bulk of Tory MPs would not vote for it. So I don't believe a second referendum, at least in this Parliament, could happen. What might happen is if there's a general election, Corbyn might offer a second referendum if he is elected, because he will say, well, if I'm the Prime Minister, I'll reopen the negotiations and I'll bring it back to you in a second referendum. That is a possibility. But the last thing in the whole world that Tony Blair wants is Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn.
Of course not. Of course he doesn't. No, but don't you think, and therefore, if it's thrown out by Parliament at the beginning of December for the vote, that's the point where we actually turn around, or the Tories turn around and say that they're going to go for someone else but May, and actually have a kind of a more pro-Brexit candidate or Prime Minister. And, you know, therefore, and also the Labour Party as well, can also then argue against it that way. We've fired off our cannons a bit too quickly. We need to get that vote rejected, first of all, in Parliament, which I think it will do. And if the Tories are doing the mathematics, they're going, look, we don't have enough people enough MPs to actually be brave enough to challenge May openly, which clearly, as we've seen it from the last 2 days. Yeah. Then
there's a lot going on behind the scenes, though.
Let her fall in her sword.
Well, of course, look, I understand. I understand what you're saying. Their feeling would be that they need to stop Theresa May's deal in its tracks, and that's best done right now because that leaves some time for a new leader, say David Davis. If they all agreed on David Davis, for example, the former Brexit secretary, interregnum Prime Minister, send him back to Brussels. There's still time. I think that's the thinking. But don't be puzzled by the lack of public statements that the Tory MPs are going to vote down Mrs May. As I say, I'm sure she'll get a majority. But if she gets more than 100 Tory MPs voting against her, and if that is in any way nudging up towards 120, she's a goner, in my view. David, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. And I want others. 0344 499 1000. If you disagree with me, your call is especially welcome. Darren Rose has tweeted, I've been looking forward to moats all day on the complete dog's dinner the Tories have made of the Brexit deal. What a bunch of completely useless, self-serving blank I have ever had the misfortune to witness. Where is Frank Spencer when you need him? Betty. Councillor James Ball, I just lost that one. Dan El Rojo says 1 in 2 children in the UK are in poverty. Britain has been a member of the Thatcherite EU for 40 years, and the middle-class FBPE Ramoning Waitrose warriors wonder why we voted leave. Globalisation does not work. Dan, that's the tweet of the day for me. Councillor James Ball says, do all these People's Vote supporters think 17 million will just shrug their shoulders and accept the overturn of their 2016 vote? Say they get another vote result in their favour. The same Tories would be negotiating that. David Leviscont says, well, GG, Theresa May the Remainer, who is not capable of delivering fish and chips, let alone Brexit. Unless the fish and chips are from Brussels. Well, there will be under her deal. Kasif Hanif says, George, I told you a few months ago the ERG and Jacob Rees-Mogg would not allow a rotten deal. You summarised it by saying, I believe Rees-Mogg has a knife in his top hat. No deal Brexit, here we come. No 39 billion for the EU. I must say, the idea that we pay the best part of £40 billion for a divorce deal in which she keeps the house, the kids, the car, the record collection, and can stop you remarrying anyone else until she agrees to it. That's the worst divorce deal in history. And trust me, I know a bit about these things. Damien Leonardi says, calling it now, enough centrist Labour MPs will abstain to get May's deal through. When they do, let's chuck them out. That's interesting. I'll be right back after this. 9 backers in the first hour. Go to Kickstarter.com and support my film Killing Kelly. We've spoken to Daniel Kawczynski, and we had the news from the lovely Danielle Jafiecka. I'm getting into my stride pronouncing these Polish names. I wonder if there are others still to come. Professor Dnoald Hirsch, I hope, will be coming up to talk about the poverty report by the United Nations. I don't know about you, but I feel a little bit ashamed that our country is being investigated by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty. Call me old-fashioned, but I was brought up in an era when we sent investigators to other places to examine their extreme poverty. But I'm not embarrassed. I'm ashamed of the fact that the headline in the report so far is that almost 1 in 2 of Britain's children are poor, living in poverty. That 1.5 million are living in destitution. I can't accentuate that word enough. Food banks, universal credit rollout. We are in the midst of an epidemic of poverty, underachievement. And then we look at the Daily Mail and we're wondering why our young people are tearing the joint apart, as well as tearing themselves apart. Philip Baines sends the following tweet, a good one. George, glad you're talking about the UN Rapporteur's report. It didn't feature at all on the 6:30 ITV national news. Shameful omission. Anyway, TV now switched off and I'm listening to your show for some enlightenment. Thank you for that, Philip. I knew that it wouldn't make the BBC or ITV. Apparently, Channel 4 News did go to the report's press conference, but we're going to be filleting this report over the next few weeks. We're going to look at all the aspects of poverty in Britain. Bob Justice says they have made a new kilo, le grand K, out of a silicon sphere, presumably the most spherical ball in the world. Won't lose any atoms like the original. This deal of May's is less than rounded. It's a clown car on square wheels. A brilliant segue there, Bob. I thought we were talking only about the silicon sphere. So let me get this right. The silicon weight, or rather the kilo weight that we were using, lost weight, imagine. It's been on a kind of diet, because its atoms were atrophying, and therefore it's no longer precisely 1 kilo. Le grand key is less than le grand key now, and therefore it has to be replaced. It leaves me cold. Might as well be Serbo-Croat, so far as I'm concerned. I simply can't think in metric terms. I do nothing in metric terms. And so someone asked me my height in metric. I swear to you, to save my life, I would not remotely be able to guess, even to the nearest metre. It seems to me, if we're leaving the European Union, let's make a virtue of the fact that we drive on a different side of the road and that our measurements are different. Personally, I love the furlong, especially when I used to follow the horses. I always loved a furlong. It's a beautiful word. It's a beautiful measurement. Call me old-fashioned. The doctor says, great news, George, only 5 Brexit secretaries until Christmas. Now, somebody put out a spoof earlier on Twitter that the new Brexit secretary, what's his name, Steve Wright in the afternoon or something, Steve Barclay, had resigned after 5 minutes. It was only a joke, but there's a very large number of people appear to have believed it, and they think she's now looking for another Brexit secretary. Yeah, tell me, give me an exit Brexit song, there you go, and give me a kilo song. What songs can I play to mark this declining kilo story? We'll play them in the last hour. On the serious business of poverty in Britain and the UN report, we've got Lucy on the line. Lucy, welcome.
Oh, hello, George.
Hi. What would you like to say?
How are you doing?
Yeah, good. I'm in fine form, thanks.
I was going to say about the UN report, because obviously, the conversation at the moment is all about Brexit and children in need, but we're not hearing enough.
Talk about children in need. I mean, my goodness, it's not children in need we need. It's a revolution. If half our children are poor, living in poverty, children in need ain't going to be able to fix that. No,
that's right. But I wanted to highlight really this report because it is important news, and I think it's more important than Brexit, and it should be heard. It's sort of, he said that there's a denial about the hardship that's causing causing lower income people, the elderly, and other vulnerable people in immense hardship. And that we're heading towards an alienated society because of the government cut to local government funding, which is destroying the roots of our civil society. I heard the other day that they're closing 25 libraries in Essex alone. So these cuts are really destroying the fabric of our society, as well as there was a report that was released, I think it was last year, that said that 120,000 people had died due to austerity policies. And then hearing that ministers told Philip all is well and running according to plan, and you have to wonder, were 120,000 deaths due to austerity policies part of that plan?
Well, I dare say it wasn't a declared objective of the plan. But I'm looking at a picture right here of George Osborne, now the editor of the Evening Standard, but formerly the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Him and David Cameron, who, as the Tory MP Nadine Dorries once pointed out, neither of them knew the price of a pint of milk. I dare say that they knew and were advised that austerity kills. Poverty kills. Anybody who's ever read a book about the 1920s and 30s knows that it stunts lives and ends lives. And if you grow up poor and you survive it, it colours and influences your entire life thereafter. It certainly has mine. I grew up poor, and I never cease to remember that.
No.
And even if you get on, you're always haunted. I mean, let me give you a confession. If there's an unopened bit of cheese in the fridge and an opened bit, I open the unopened bit and eat it. And when I was asked once why, I said, because I suppose subconsciously I'm afraid that somebody is going to take it away. Now, that's a very minor and funny example. But if you survive poverty, your life is stunted and blunted. But many will not survive it, and in excess of 100,000 have not survived this period of 10 years of austerity. We're lucky if we live 70 years, and 10 of them have been spent with no wage increases, massive cuts in public services, and no hope. Talk about a blight on someone's life.
Yeah. I actually interviewed Philip Alston last week when he was in Jaywick, and I asked him, how do we stop the government from sweeping this report under the carpet, like they've done? He has said that people need to draw attention to the report and make sure the recommendations and issues are discussed.
Well, you've done it tonight, and we're doing it tonight, and we'll be doing it. We really hoped to speak on him before he got on the plane, but we were unable to do so. Perhaps we'll speak to him in New York next week. Yeah, Lucy, thank you very much indeed for that call. Carl M. says we need bigger families, George. Lone parent families are twice as likely to be in poverty than bigger families. Let's hope we in Britain carry on having kids and the threat of Tory EU austerity doesn't put off young families procreating. Carl, I have been arguing for decades that one of our primary priorities, should be to drive up the birth rate in Britain and to make it fiscally worthwhile. Instead of families dreading another pregnancy, actually making another pregnancy because it will be financially worthwhile. I've also argued for decades, why are we putting our mother and father, when they get old, in a granny farm at vast cost to the economy, when we could fiscally, through the tax system, make it possible for people to build granny flats, granny accommodation on their sons' and daughters' houses so that they could stay together as a larger family unit. I strongly agree with you, Carl. Thank you. Russell says, it's gone. The Dunkirk spirit from this nation. Worse still, the weak, easily led Ramoners in their EU-flagged Y-fronts. I never got that close myself. Ready to double-cross the UK for the unelected Juncker and his co-racketeers. They and the Ramoners will keep on delaying Brexit until they get the rerun they demand. Well, that's definitely the game, Russell. Whether it will succeed remains to be seen. What is extremely educative is to read what is being said by the EU leaders in Europe about this deal when they think we're not looking. They think we can't speak in French or German. They are gloating that they now hold the whip hand. I never much cared for someone standing over me with a whip myself. Hedy says, George, I can imagine what a proper unit of weight like the pound actually feels like. It is 3 apples. Or in the case of a yard, it's the length of a Roman soldier's stride. The metric system is based on bits of metal hidden in a Parisian bank. I say, kill the kilo. Hedy, that is the best tweet of the night, the day, the week, maybe the year. That is absolutely stupendous. That's my manifesto. Elect me as your leader, and I will return us to real measurements that mean something, not bits of metal hidden in a Parisian bank. Had to be a Parisian bank, didn't it? James Callaghan says, not often I get to hear this show live, so I had to tweet in. The reason the media haven't made a big deal about the UN report is because there wasn't a big yellow bear dancing in the background, shaking a donation bucket. Great show as ever. Thank you, James. Great tweet. Great name. And Fergal Leddy says, the UK is already a vassal state. Look at the record of UN voting over the last several decades and observe how seldom it diverges from that of the US. That's absolutely correct, Fergal. But that can be changed by a change of government. Vassalage of the kind in mind in this EU deal cannot be changed, whoever is the Prime Minister. Let me give you just one example. In the deal, copper plate, copper bottomed, carved in stone, state aid is outlawed in this deal. Because if Britain remains in the single market and in the customs union, then like the other European Union countries, it is not allowed to give state aid to its own industries. It's not allowed to protect its strategic industries. Therefore, you might be able to take into public ownership the railways, but you'll have to open that deal to compulsory competitive tendering. And if you're undercut by, say, Richard Branson, or by the French State Railway Company, they've got to get the gig. And you cannot give state aid, for example, to your steel industry because the EU will not permit it. That, Fergal, is vassalage. Mal says, George, supposedly it would take at least 24 weeks to get another referendum from when it's called. If we have another general election before then all parties should have to tell us their plan for Brexit and how they will achieve their plan during negotiations with the immovable 27. That's from Mal in Belfast. Marie McFarlane, my old pal, says, I have to say that I still think stones, pounds, ounces, and I'd love to do away with kilos. I recommend Roberta Flack's Killing Me Softly. And she puts in brackets for the obtuse amongst you. Kiloing me softly. How utterly beautiful. Marie, you are a star. Let me take a break for some capitalist messages. Now, as I already mentioned, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty has just taken off from the United States 22 minutes ago for New York, where he will deliver his findings about poverty in Britain. Many of the recent changes to social support in Britain have had a disparate impact on children, including the deeply problematic two-child policy. The Equality and Human Rights Commission forecasts that another 1.5 million more children will fall into poverty over the next 4 years as a result of the changes to benefits and taxes. That would be a 10% increase from 31% to 41% of all our children. Sanctions against parents can have unintended consequences on their children. According to the Social Metrics Commission, almost a third of the children in the UK currently live in poverty. But according to the Child Poverty Action Group, the child benefit will have lost 23% of its real value between 2010 and 2020 due to sub-inflationary uprating and the current freeze. And low-paid jobs and stagnant wages have had a direct effect on children, with families where 2 adults earn the minimum wage still falling short of the adequate income needed to raise a child. Because of changes to benefits and taxes, the Equality and Human Rights Commission projects the poverty rate for children in single-parent households to jump to a shocking 62%. Let's hear from Professor Dnoald Hirsch, who's the director of the Centre for Research in Social Policy at Loughborough University. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Do you share my embarrassment that the UN have to send special rapporteurs to investigate us? When I was young, that was the kind of thing we sent to other places.
Yes, well, it's pretty stark, the conclusion that he came to. And what stands out for me is not just that things are pretty bad and as you say, set to get worse, but also this term of the government being in denial. He's not the first person to say that. That was actually said by the National Audit Office about universal credit as well. And it's this present government don't seem to either have a plan or even to recognise really that there's a problem. And whenever they talk about universal credit, for example, they're always talking about everything being extremely rosy and improving. And most of us who study these things just really don't recognise this sort of fairy tale world which they're telling. And so I think that was the most important thing that he said, is that there isn't a kind of a way in which they're thinking about making these things better, but just being in denial about it. I mean, there's a new Secretary of State there today, Amber Rudd. Who knows?
Yippee.
Maybe she'll wake up.
Now, they're in denial even about the presence of the man in the country, as are the so-called mainstream media. Neither the BBC nor ITV even turned up at his press conference. Channel 4 News were the only ones that I know of that were there. Jacob Rees-Mogg said the whole thing was a waste of money, missing the point that actually it wasn't our money, it was the UN's money. So this denial runs deep, doesn't it? What's the reason for that? Is it national embarrassment?
Well, I mean, to be fair, the BBC did cover it. I heard it on the news, and there have been one or two other things going on today. But I think that you're right in the sense that we don't really recognise the problem in the way that we once did. And part of it is a success by the government in propaganda terms, which is that they sort of stopped making a thing about trying to get the numbers down. And they said, oh, well, income isn't really what's important, and, we should just look at education or whatever. And I would say that the media is not, therefore, regularly covering these figures in the way that they once did. And so what tends to happen is that they're telling you, remember Gordon Brown, not always with great success, but with some success, sort of made a big thing about the targets. And when you stop talking about those targets, people don't have things that you can hold them to.
Well, that's right. That's why targets have gone out of fashion in government. Now, the grim truth is that we are a country where most people are working, but even a substantial section of the workforce is in poverty. This is a kind of a new thing, isn't it? When I was young, the poor people were the people that didn't have jobs. Now we've got people in jobs, sometimes two, who are still in poverty.
Interestingly, I'm not going to make a thing about your age, but when you were young, the people who were in poverty were actually pensioners.
Yes, that's right. And now they're not.
And now they're not. But I mean, and you're right that the majority of children in poverty now are in families where people work. It's very interesting when you look at the trends. I mean, we had this thing called sort of welfare to work, or work is the best route out of poverty. We've had it for 20 years. You look at lone parents. Large numbers of lone parents have gone into part-time jobs, and their risk of being in poverty if they're in work has gone up enormously. Also, what's important, though, is that if you look at lone parents with young children, it's still the minority who are in jobs, and they're having to live on benefits, which, in our reckoning, is only about half of what they need. And these are families with children. Yeah. So I mean, and
with a two-child cap.
Both.
I mean, that stat really struck me, Professor, from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, that poverty rates for children in single-parent households are set to jump to a shocking 62%.
Yeah. One of the things you must remember about this cap is that it's coming in very slowly, because it's only people where the third child has been born after last year. But what that means is that they sort of have all these sort of nice-sounding reforms, but there are always huge cuts in the pipeline. And I think that's a challenge for Labour as well, because when you hear Labour sort of saying we're going to stop the cuts, that it's a lot of them are in the pipeline and need, if you don't do something, if you don't put more money in, and a lot of more money, then they're going to continue. And it's the same with freezing benefits. You can't just sort of say, oh well, we're not going to make any further bad changes. You really need to start reversing these things.
Now, we've got a falling birth rate. We've got actually declining or at least frozen levels of life expectancy, an aging population nonetheless, and these tremendously disturbing poverty rates. Do we really have the fifth largest economy in the world? And if we do, where's all the money?
I think we've gone down to seventh, and I never really liked that figure because it's all in absolute terms. You know, I mean, there are a lot of smaller countries that are a lot richer than us. But yes, we have got we as the UN guy said, if we want to solve this, we can. You know, I mean, we do have a lot of wealth in the country. We haven't. You know who the last person to put the income tax rate up was? Do you know when the last time we had an increase in actual income tax?
Would it be Thatcher?
No, she didn't. She cut it. No, it was Dennis Healey, 1975. So you know,
when he said he would squeeze them until the pips squeaked.
Until pips squeaked, and that he did.
I know that Margaret Thatcher had income tax at a higher rate than Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Absolutely, that's right. Because they kept on cutting it, and it really is sort of, when is this sort of bubble going to pop? Of sort of imagining that you can go on sort of giving less collectively to the state, even while people are aging and you need more health care, and that somehow, I mean, look at the last budget. They gave little treats out to people, but still thought, well, let's cut taxes for the rich, which is what they did. And until you sort of bust that bubble, you know, you're not going to do it. But you know, you look at how much wealth we've got, which is not taxed. There is a lot you could do if you wanted to.
Absolutely. So what happens now, Professor? He reports to the UN. Does this come up at the General Assembly, or is it mentioned in dispatches? It's all a bit of a shame.
Well, I mean, you know
us,
as well as I do that. You know as well as I do what chance there is of that having any influence on anything other than just the kind of debate we're having now. I mean, people don't pay any attention to it at all. There have been all sorts of UN envoys coming to say. There was one on housing, I believe, a while ago, and yeah, of course they don't pay any attention to it. But it's, as you say, it's indicative of where we've got to. I mean, what people look at and are really shocked by are really blatant, clear-cut things like food banks. You know, a while back, a decade ago, everyone was just saying, "Oh, it's all poverty is all relative, and it's all about are you sort of everyone. No one's hungry, but it's just a question of whether you can go on holiday or whatever these things are." And we aren't talking about that anymore because it's so clear that the sort of absolute poverty is actually increasing.
Increasing indeed. Dnoald Hirsch, Professor of Loughborough University, thank you very much indeed for joining us. He's the Director of the Centre for Research in Social Policy in Loughborough. We're talking about the UN rapporteur who's just been touring Britain looking at our poverty. And we'll be returning to this as we fill it through that report. We'll try and get its author, Philip Alston, Professor Philip Alston, on the line next week from New York. Irina Vanat says, George, the best way out of the Brexit mess is to revoke our Article 15 notification before 29 March 2019. Scottish court has referred the question of revocability to the CJEU. That's the Court of Justice of the EU. The hearing is on 27th November. The United Kingdom government is fighting tooth and nail, but keeping quiet about the case. Scouse Alarm, my old pal in Liverpool, says the UN's rapporteur for extreme poverty and human rights said, and I quote, that 1.5 million people in the UK live in destitution is grim. The government could solve this. The money is there, but they choose not to. And Scouse Alarm adds, everyone should be outraged by this. David Woolnough says it's the system, George. It breeds inequality, poverty and debt. Until it changes, this condition will continue. After all, we still have the bailouts to pay for. And David Leviscont says, George, will the Houses of Parliament be renamed by the public the houses of traitors? And will Her Majesty's government become the Junkers EU enforcement agency? Christina says it's good to hear people like Lucy phoning in to talk radio. Lucy conveyed examples of how Tory cuts were affecting the quality of people's everyday lives. Perhaps some higher paid people do not appreciate how badly lower paid have been affected. That's absolutely correct, Christina. And Rick says the news that poverty is out of control in this country is not news to people like us. The link between austerity and poverty is undeniable. And there's a few holes in that text missing. I don't know if that's a euphemism. Yeah, they were swear words. Well, people are very angry. I don't blame them, and I don't blame you, Rick. This from Denny. 2.5 years of grovelling to Juncker and co. Now abject surrender by this spineless government. Ignore the people at your peril, Mrs. May. Thank you, Denny, for that. Sean Caden in Australia says, I've never known in my lifetime the palpable anger that has simmered for years. Sadly, I fear the pot is about to boil over this betrayal by the political classes. When people have no hope and feel they have nothing to lose, it is dangerous. It is. Lon Malvo says if George Galloway is right and there is an election and Labour win and Corbyn is Prime Minister, the EU won't renegotiate the Brexit agreement, and the options are still much the same for the UK. 1, no deal. 2, no Brexit. That's a false dichotomy, Lon. Deliberately so. Donald Ryan says Andrew Bridgen on Dermot Monaghan on Sky News makes a very simple and good point. You always have to be prepared to go for no deal, or else you'll never get a deal. Theresa May seems to have missed how to negotiate 101. Well, that's a fact. I mentioned last week the factory I used to work in when I was very young, Michelin Tires. We were a strongly unionised place. If we had gone into our negotiations in 1973 and 74 and told the management that we regarded no deal as a catastrophe, that would have guaranteed the worst possible deal. If they thought that we would not walk out and down tools, then why would they negotiate anything decent or meaningful for us at all? This is ABC for anyone who's ever negotiated with anybody about anything. Nick Kader says, I work in a factory with over 1,000 people and I haven't heard one who supports May's deal. The debates in the canteen alone lead me to believe that her deal will sow the seeds of discontent that will last a long time. It's a stitch-up, nothing less. Nick, I agree with you. And why I said it was dangerous. If you were on the far right in Britain, what would you be hoping happens with the Brexit deal? I'll tell you, you'd be hoping that the government, the state, the establishment betrays the 17.4 million Brexit voters, because then you'd have a narrative about the stab in the back, which always fuels the rise of the far right. Here's Mandy in Westminster. Go ahead, Mandy.
Oh, hi, George. Nice to speak to you.
And you?
I've listened to your programme for a long while.
Thank you.
Sort of plucked up the courage today to get on the phone and
Go ahead.
put my piece. So I run a business for 16 years. It was a Prince's Trust business. And anyone that starts a business, you realise every day you have to make decisions. You make difficult decisions. You pass things. You negotiate. It's difficult. Why is it that all our thousands of small businesses live through that reality, but we've got paid politicians, each of them on about £72,000 a year,
and the rest
unable to make a decision. It's absolutely disgusting. It's appalling. We voted to leave, and it was their job to deliver what the public voted for. They are paid by us to deliver what we vote for. So there's just no excuse. It's a complete travesty. They are absolutely disrespecting the British public. It's a disgrace. And also the media's been involved in this, confusing it, putting all sorts of extra spin on it.
Project Fear. There's been Project Fear for 2 years.
Listen, again, I say I'm a small business. It's a straightforward thing. It's a negotiation. We went into it. There's a decision to leave. Let us leave. We are all educated. We have degrees. We have A-levels. Everybody understands the economy. Everybody knows people voted because they're not happy with the way the economy is working. It does not work for the majority of the British people. It wasn't about immigration. It wasn't about racism. It was about all sorts of things to do with people's general income. So this whole process of the media confusion, the Remainer confusion is absolutely appalling. And, you know, I'm a Labour Party person through and through, but I was very much pleased by, you know, Rees-Mogg today just speaking clearly. I mean, the man shows respect. He spoke clearly about the problem that we're facing right now, which is we have a politician, we have a Prime Minister who believes that the British public are stupid. We have a political class that has complete disdain for the public and the electorate, and it's just got to stop now. We need some rational common sense here because people understood why they voted for Brexit. We want out. We want a chance for our British economy to work for British people.
I don't know where you've been, but if you've waited all this time to phone me when you're so eloquent, so well informed, got so much that is important to say, I really do hope you'll become a regular. You could even one day become a legend, Mandy. Now, let me just put this point to you back. This has not been an accident. You can call me a conspiracy theorist if you like, but a conspiracy theorist, in my view, is someone who doubts the words of proven liars. And if that's a conspiracy theorist, well, call me that. I said right from the beginning that if we did not decisively break from the EU right at the beginning, then a whole rearguard action would be organised. It would be financed to the tune of millions of pounds to try and wreck Brexit. I wrote about it every single week in my columns online. They're all still available. I said right at the beginning, if you give these people an inch, they'll take a mile. If they have any possibility of wrecking Brexit, they will. Because the most powerful and the most rich people in Britain are totally against Brexit. And the idea that they were just going to vacate the battlefield if you allowed them to meddle and undermine was just foolish. Look, the banks, the biggest source of money in this country, the banks are to a man and woman against Brexit. What remains of big capital, big business in Britain is against Brexit. Most of the Conservative Party are against Brexit. Most of the media are against it. All of Whitehall is against it. All of the deep state is against it. We should not have given them an inch in which to operate to undermine us. And then there's this Farage who broke open a bottle of champagne, and I was going to swear there. He took off. He broke open the champagne and took off, celebrating into the sunlight, and left the field completely clear for these people to work their devilish scheme. And that's what they've done. And now Brexit is in danger because of that, Mandy. What do you say?
I agree with 100% of what you're saying, and I just wanted to make a point. One of the most disgusting elements of this campaign is this thing they're calling the people's vote. What an insult!
Yeah.
We voted.
Yeah.
We, the people, voted. We knew why we voted. How dare...
What were the 17.4 million? Were they not people?
These are the people. It's a disgrace. I'm just hoping that reason will overrule madness. Obviously I'm a Labour Party supporter, I'm happy of, Rees-Mogg today. I'm happy that there are sort of murmurings within the Conservative Party, trying to do the right thing. Let's fingers crossed. But I believe in the Parliament. I respect parliamentary power, but this will shake the nation. We are not stupid. We see and understand the BBC, the civil servants, all those, partners in this crime against democracy. I just hope that reason, will rule out and we'll have the right income for the British people who voted for Brexit for purely, I would say 100% economic reasons. The economy at the moment just does not work for 90% of the population.
Well
when
said.
you have a situation like that, you need change, and that's what the people voted for.
Well said. Mandy, don't be a stranger in Westminster. Let's take a break. The switchboard is lighting up like a Christmas tree. In fact, we had to drop one of our collars on the switchboard so that somebody elsewhere in the building could get a line out. So you better get your calls charted now if you hope to be called before 10 o'clock. 0344 499 1000. Let me do this read that I have to do. If you're listening to Talk Radio online, did you know you can also listen on DAB digital radio? Radio is growing and more people than ever across the UK can now receive DAB radio stations with new transmission areas being added all the time. So press the auto tune or auto scan button on your DAB digital radio now to make sure you don't miss out. Here's Shirley in Birmingham. Go ahead, Shirley.
Yeah, hi, George. I was just thinking perhaps a solution for Theresa could be set up a Brexit committee. I know she's kind of got one. Ask Nigel Farage, Gisela Stewart, Kate Hoey, Suzanne Evans from UKIP to come on board just to drive through at this latest space. She could also put Bill Cash on there and maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg, some strong Brexiteers, because I do feel like she's in a marriage and she's umming and ahhing, like a battered wife, whether you should leave, whether you should go back. I think she needs somebody just to drive the last bit through. Like I think you said, the leaving was open-ended and we've got to ask the EU if we can leave. All this kind of nonsense, those little bits, somebody should be able to change.
Well, that little bit is...
Not little bit, but
that little bit is the absolute killer. It's much worse than Chequers. In Chequers, there was going to be an extended period during which we would lead up to, with a date, the departure from the single market and the customs union. This time, under this deal, we stay in the single market, stay in the customs union, until the EU agrees that we may leave it. And all of that time, we cannot negotiate any trade arrangements with anybody else. This is what I said about the divorce point. It's like agreeing a divorce with your wife, but part of the deal is you can never remarry unless she agrees to it. That's madness.
Yes, it's not. Because you see, the Theresa May's government, the Tory party, are in a precarious position. They've got things like universal credit and all this kind of nonsense. So I don't know how much longer they can last. The Labour Party policies are better, but what people don't understand about Labour is that unless we come out of the EU, we can't put Labour Party policies in place.
Absolutely
they just won't allow us.
You're absolutely right, yeah.
There's nobody in Labour who wants Brexit, apart from perhaps Corbyn and maybe MacDonald, is it? Perhaps him. But I do think she should just bring on board Nigel Farage, and Suzanne Evans and, Gisela Stewart, who's sensible. Just bring people, Brexiteers, who can just push through.
But that presupposes Theresa May wants to leave the EU, and I'm not at all convinced of that. She was, of course, a prominent Remainer in the campaign. I did say on the first morning, as the sun rose, after the referendum result, I went up onto my roof and shot the video, that the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, should form a national unity committee involving Jeremy Corbyn trigger Article 50 right away, which Corbyn called for on the first day, and go straight over there and negotiate what needed to be negotiated. But this was refused by the Tories. So you're never going to get opposition politicians joining in now. Why should they take the can for what has gone very badly wrong? Thanks very much, Shirley. An excellent call. Ford says, if they get rid of Theresa May, who are they going to put in our place? Boris Johnson, #Joker. David Davis, too lazy. Dominic Raab doesn't know how things work. #Brexit chaos, Brexit shambles. Now, songs are coming in for the state we're in, about the kilo, about the Brexit, about Theresa May. Marie McFarlane's one, I've read it already, Kiloing Me Softly by Roberta Flack, a song written by a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain. And Marek says, song recommendations, The Wait, but the version by Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Temptations. You're welcome. Thanks, Marek. And Ryan says, an exit Brexit song, how about Bye Bye Baby by the Bay City Rollers? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm appearing at the Rock and Roll Book Club in Camden quite soon. Follow me on Twitter, on Facebook to see the details of that. I'm going to be talking through my talking book on the 1970s, looking at the music, the rock and roll of those days. Now, my wife's just told me we're up to 14 backers on Kickstarter.com. I'm a wee bit disappointed in that. I would have hoped it was a bit faster. Maybe after the show, people will go and do it. Councillor James Ball says, whilst Theresa May is our Prime Minister, Donald Tusk is our President. Not mine. He ain't mine. I never voted for him. I owe no loyalty to anyone I didn't have a part in electing. And here's an SMS from Peter. Says, George, I can confirm, having been away a few weeks, what this gentleman is saying. The EU detests countries like Poland and Hungary because they want self-governance. The EU needs to control countries, either by legislation or debt. No independent thinkers, which goes against what the EU's aim is, a federalist Europe. I've mixed with the MPs of Europe. I know their mindset. I know what they want. I'm just sad our own population can't see where we're going should we remain in the EU. By the way, President Macron has just reintroduced conscription. Every youth in France is about to be conscripted into the French army, which will soon be a European army. What's not to love? Here's my prediction. Macron will be out before people agree to conscription in France. Tony X says, if the Tories are looking for a new PM, there are many bad choices. Daniel Kawczynski isn't a bad choice. Okay. Dan El Rojo says there will never be a good deal with the anti-democratic EU. Vengeful Macron is a modern-day Georges Clemenceau, and Merkel wants an army behind German capitalism, not seen since the Third Reich. What could possibly go wrong, Dan? The Red Resistance says, is there any reason why, quote-unquote, Northern Ireland couldn't become an overseas territory like Gibraltar as a way round this backstop impasse? Better by far that we have one Ireland. I'll be right back with the final hour after this. Now, Roger Highfield is one of the directors of the Science Museum, and it turns out, to my amazement, that we have a Super Kilo too, one of these kilo weights on which we base the official weight of the kilo. I said earlier that the Grand Kilo in France has lost weight for reasons which are beyond me, but it's something to do with atoms. Weight, it's the Atkins diet, Tamer says. Might well be true. So we'll see how our own kilo is doing, because Roger will definitely know. Roger Highfield, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George.
Is our kilo wasting away like the French one?
Well, the problem is, that you're not quite sure if you rely on a lump of metal, whether it's gaining a bit of weight because something's being deposited on it, or if you gave it a bit of a clean, whether it's getting a bit lighter. And in fact, for 130 years, we've relied on this lump of metal, of this platinum and iridium in a vault in Paris. And in fact, it's got several kind of sister lumps that they use for reference, and they're all kind of slightly drifting out of alignment with each other. So scientists have been desperate in this sort of high-tech, high-precision world to come up with a definition of the kilogram that doesn't rely on this lump of metal, which could be, getting a bit bigger or
could be tampered with.
You
know what these bankers are like.
Well, it was fine for a long, long time, but you can imagine if you're a pharmaceutical company doling out minute amounts of drug and so on. In this modern world, we really need ultra precision.
Yeah.
So instead of using this lump of metal, today, after a long, long wrangle for more than a decade, there's been a vote at the General Conference on Weights and Measures to accept relating the kilogram to a fundamental constant of nature rather than this lump of metal.
Tell me what that means in English. Relating to a fundamental concept in nature. The lump of metal was easier for me to understand.
No, you're right. It's tricky, but basically there's something called Planck's constant, which is built into the fabric of nature to do with quantum theory and tiny amounts of energy called quanta, and this minute number called Planck's constant deals with that. And it's the same anywhere you are in the universe. And using a device called a Kibble balance, which is devised by a British guy called Brian Kibble, you can relate a weight or a mass to this fundamental constant rather than relating it to a kind of the king of the kilograms in Paris instead. So you're not reliant on a physical object anymore. You've kind of related the kilogram to the fabric of the very cosmos itself. I hope that makes sense.
Well, it's certainly thrilling, whether it makes sense or not. It's got me thinking. Final frontiers and all that. Roger, we've got one right in your museum. Can people see it?
They can indeed, yeah. If they go into the Science Museum now, you can not only see the UK kilogram, but you can see the Kibble balance as well that's used to define the new kilogram. So you can see it right at the back of the museum.
It's done by electricity, I'm told.
That's right. So you basically, you put your mass that you're interested in there, and then you use a magnetic field to sort of balance it. And then the Kibble balance can relate that magnetic field to this fundamental constant, this Planck's constant. So you don't need a reference weight anymore.
Have we got the same thing for imperial measures?
Well, we do it for seconds, and sort of, in fact, the kilogram's been a particularly hard one to relate to fundamental constants. But say, something like a second now is defined in terms of wavelengths of light and things like that. And that's really important because, in this world of GPS and so on, you get very subtle effects predicted by Einstein's general relativity when satellites whiz around us. And so you need ultra-precise time measurement. So again, clocks and traditional mechanical mechanisms just don't cut it in the modern world. So you need to relate things like seconds to fundamental constants. So it's part of a big, big move across all these sort of fundamental measures to relate them to nature instead.
Finally, Roger, can you relate to my campaign? I only made it up about half an hour ago, that as we're leaving the European Union, we should try to revive imperial measures. I think in imperial measures anyway. If somebody asked me my height in metric, even if my life depended on it, I couldn't get near it.
Scientists don't really like imperial measures because they're a bit confusing. Things multiples of 10 are kind of nice. And there was an infamous example of NASA got its imperial and its metric measures mixed up a few years ago, and that ended up with a Mars probe slamming into the red planet.
Well, that's serious, I'll grant you. That is serious. It is funny, though, that the United States, for example, still do miles like us, not kilometres. There is a confusion. as long as people like me are still alive, there'll be a confusion. So I'm in my car with 4 young children who all think metrically, with a Dutch wife who doesn't understand imperial measures at all. We've got along, I suppose, and we're still together, but it is potentially a confusion, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the French, after the revolution, they tried to come up with decimal time, and that failed. So, it's not all gloomy. We haven't converted everything into nice logical multiples of 10. So I hope, that
you see, as a lady it does. A lady pointed out that a pound is 3 apples, a yard is the length of a Roman soldier's stride. When I was a horseman, loved the furlong. I just think our imperial measures are kind of culturally richer than decimalising everything.
I think there is something to be said for that, but I mean, you could almost, see what's happened to the kilogram in the same way. We're relating it to the fundamentals of the universe rather than something that's made fashion by a human being. Is that more or less natural discuss? That's
a very good subject, but we'll have to return to it another night. But if I do return to it, it'll be with you, Roger Highfield, great guest, the director, one of the directors of the Science Museum. I told you it was the Open University of the airwaves, didn't I? Now, the songs, again, we've got Killowing Me Softly by Roberta Flack, written by Ewan MacColl, a member of the Communist Party. That came from Marie McFarlane, herself formerly a member of the Communist Party. And we've got I Wanna Break Free by Queen and Fat Bottomed Girl by Queen. I've no idea what that means. Theresa May looks rather skinny to me. By the way, on this day in 1688, the last witch was hanged in Boston, Massachusetts. That has nothing to do with any of these discussions, and I'm against the concept of witches and, of course, of hanging. Lorne Malvo, what a wonderful name, says we should all say no to being part of a possible EU army, but a more urgent positive move for the UK would be to stop following the USA into disastrous wars after wars. You're right, of course, Lorne, but we can be against both, and I'm against both. And I'm angry because when I said over and over again during the Brexit campaign that they planned to have a European army, they all called it a conspiracy theory. Marie's come up with more. The Beatles, lovely Rita, meter maid. She spelled meter, M-E-T-R-E. I was singing that on the streets of Liverpool recently. That's a good one, though. Now, who did this Fat Bottom Girl? Ali and Southwark. Marek, we've got that one. That was The Wait, the Diana Ross and Temptations version. I need some more if I'm going to make some tunes. Let's talk first, though, to Howard in Hastings. Howard.
Oh, hello, George.
Welcome. A very historic place you're in.
Yes, you could say that for many reasons.
Yeah, ragged-trousered philanthropist reasons.
Yes, and certain politicians as well currently residing.
She's back. So now we know the tariff for lying to the House of Commons. 200 days.
Exactly. It puts my heart into a good place to be able to speak to you. I've listened to you for a long time, but like the two ladies who rung in just before 9, I feel their passion, and I think it's apposite what you said earlier on about maybe having to get her Madge involved, because when that lady you spoke to just before 9 was saying about bringing on people such as Gisela Stewart and Corbyn and maybe Kate Hoey, I couldn't agree more, because it seems that this country has been under relentless attack from creeping neoliberalism for 40 years or so now, and it just seems that we're at an impasse here, and I thought from day one we were going to need something like a national coalition to enable this Brexit, because it seems to require either an ideological traditional British right party, which I wouldn't agree with normally, or a traditional leftist sort of Benite Footite party to do that, or ideally a combination of the two. But the sort of third way politics, which has been triangulated by the sort of neoliberalism which comes out of the EU, any government of that sort of cautious nature is by definition not going to deliver a Brexit because they'll probably be working via the civil servants in cahoots with the neoliberal project, which seems to be becoming a global thing and being enforced everywhere and affecting democracy and causing this sort of blowback. It worries me. I don't see how we're going to get out of this situation, but I think we need to, and it does look like increasingly now we might have to take a no-deal scenario.
Well, we should, if we'd... Howard, by the way, that was a magnificent call, and if that's your first time calling me, that is right up there with the very best. We should have said from the beginning, we're leaving, and we'll trade with you on WTO terms if necessary. However, if you would like to make a deal with us that we don't put tariffs or barriers in your way if you won't put them in ours, we will give your citizens living here the same rights as you give our citizens living there, and we'll continue to cooperate on policing and terrorism and so on. Now, if all this sounds familiar to you, Howard, it's because I've been saying that since day one. If we had done that, would we have been in a better or a worse place today? I mean, unarguably, we would have been in a better place because they would have come to us and said, yes, let's find a way of managing this. Instead, we went on our knees, cap in hand, to them. And we told them from the start, leaving you with no deal is a disaster for us. So what are you going to offer us? Which, as a matter of simple logic, is to invite the worst possible proposals from the EU. And that's exactly what we've got.
Yes, in effect, we obliterated any chance we had of engineering an exit from the institution, which, I mean, many people would disagree with me and say I'm extreme, but I do see it as a behemoth. I mean, it is a massive...
Who could disagree with that? It's the fattest cats in the world. It is the best upholstered bureaucracy ever known to man. I've been there. I've walked around it. Look at the deal that the MEPs have just got. The British MEPs that are of course out now after we leave the EU have got redundancy terms that frankly beggar belief. Good luck to them in one way.
Yes.
But that's precisely a symptom of how lush and lavish this behemoth is.
And politicians from across the political floor started to notice this. Tony Benn, in the early 80s, in his diaries, when he was having to go over there and negotiate, he started getting suspicious. And many other politicians, going back 30 years, have been warning about this, and no one's listened because we've been told, we've all been put into one box by the media establishment. We have to be given a sort of badge as being some kind of swivel-eyed loon or one type of, Brexiter, which just wants to beat the drum and all that kind of stuff, which is doing a disservice to the huge array of valid reasons which people have been warning us about for 30 years or so of why we need to be suspicious of getting ever closer sucked into this union and maybe going it alone again as a sovereign nation state. And it seems also that sovereign nation state is actually, I always used to be very suspicious of nationalism. I was brought up, as a sort of classical liberal, and I still am at heart, but it seems a nation state is possibly one of the few bulwarks you would have in the modern world.
Well, that's right. It's the only polity of sufficient weight that it can be controlled democratically. That's the point. A nation state can be controlled democratically. And if they were offering me, I've said this before, if they were offering me a democratic Europe where every person in Europe determined the course of events in Europe, that would be a different thing. But what we're being told is, and forevermore shall be, our EU future is so far from democratic as to be an absurdity. Howard, you're a very good example of the plurality of Brexit voices that we never, ever hear. Thank you for that, Howard in Hastings. I was, of course, completely wrong. That's 1978 and now. I was getting mixed up with The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, which was written by Ewan McCall, but that's a very, very beautiful song. Although I think the Fugees did a better version. Kiloing Me Softly. That's for Marie McFarlane. Now, George, Mandy of Westminster was talking complete and utter nonsense. How do you and her explain awful people like McVeigh, Mogg, IDS being pro-Brexit? The referendum is not legally binding and is just a glorified opinion poll. Anyway, Britain is supposed to be a parliamentary representative democracy, not a delegated direct democracy. We elect MPs to make decisions on our behalf. Roll on an integrated EU superstate. 52% is hardly the voice of the people. That's Bob-Air Bucks. And Scouser Lar says, give my thanks to all your callers that have made your show too busy for Tamar tonight. I hope you're this inundated with calls every week. Sorry, Tamar, I had to read it out. I mean, it just came up on my screen. Mr. R says, as a maths teacher, if I have to ban the kilo and start all over again with imperial measures, it will do marvels for our fractions, but I will want to pull someone's ears off. Not yours, of course. I would find a Tory. Mr. R, you can do it. Mal says, that's it. I definitely want to leave the EU, no more so now that I've found that France controls the kilo. No wonder their measurement has dwindled. It's like being in the EU. And the Communicipalist says, since 2016, the very idea of the UK democracy has been under continual attack. First, we had refusal to accept majority decisions, then a call for another vote, now a proposed unelected national government, another attempted denial of UK popular democracy. James Ball says, George, I'm 44. I grew up in economic poverty. The effect has been that I've struggled in the same in and out of work poverty my entire adult life. I'm now claiming universal credit. What have the EU done to help me or my residents? Well, I must say, we're doing so badly that anyone who likes to pretend the EU has been a panacea for us doesn't live in the world that I know. Marie says the British population will not succumb to threats from the EU, re Ireland, Greece, Portugal, etc., who did. 70% of Labour constituencies voted leave, and we are even angrier since 2016. This will get ugly unless this deal is voted down. This was the real people's vote. And Georgie says, what a refreshing change to have an MP that actually listens to his constituents. Very rare in a Tory. And I'm with you, Gigi. No one has the right to dictate who you can count on as friends. Thank you very much indeed. Here is Chris in Colchester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, George.
Hi, mate.
Yeah, just one quick thing about David Kelly. The best informative thing I've seen on it is by the Corbett report. There's a video about it on there. You probably know everything on there already, but if there's something there you missed, then
no, I'll definitely go to that. I'll definitely watch that, Chris. I'm in an information gathering stage while we see if we've got the backing to make the film, and if we do, I want to have at my fingertips every piece of information that I can, but I'm already pretty clued up on it. I have a working hypothesis, put it that way.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to have to disagree with you about a general election. I mean, this issue's too big for party politics, and I've got no interest in the Conservative Party being replaced by people like Diane Abbott, John McDonnell, and the likes of that. It's just Starmer, Tom Watson, why replace one corrupt party for another? And Jeremy Corbyn's proved to be completely incompetent this year. And even if they were in power, Labour, the Conservatives, you'll find these people that have voted for Brexit, all those MPs will vote against Labour, and most of the Labour Party is against Brexit anyway, so it isn't going to be any better. And sorry.
What's the way forward then, Chris?
Well, we need a leader, but I don't think we're allowed to leave. That's what I think. I think we'll end up.
You think it's Hotel California? You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
Yeah, we'll never be able to leave. And Theresa May, I think she's intentionally screwed this up, and it's not just some wild conspiracy because she screwed up this country up. She keeps talking about the national interest. I've read enough Chomsky and listened to enough. No, national interest means special interest. And Andrew Terry said on Newsnight this year about Philip May that Philip is clearly acting informally as an advisor to Theresa May, probably much like Dennis did to Margaret Thatcher. So, and you know how corrupt...
Well, most people's spouses are influential, at least on the pillow. But we've got no evidence that he is driving the Brexit negotiations.
Well, we haven't, but we bombed Syria this year on a video by Al-Qaeda, and he's got shares in Keith Martin. So I wouldn't be surprised. Anything wouldn't surprise me. But the thing is, David Davis is the only person who I see has any credibility.
Well, I like David Davis a lot, and I think he's a very courageous guy. And I was very surprised to hear someone earlier describe him as lazy. He's the least lazy man I've ever known. And you see, the value of Davis to the government would be you could maybe get a deal in the Conservative Party that he should become a kind of interim prime minister to finish this business, see the country off the EU and into the world, and then he might agree that, he might not fight the next election in 2022. That is, it seems to me, one course of action that the Tories might go for, but probably the ambitions of all the other rivals would probably make that impossible. Yeah,
but the one thing is that I believe that, because I saw him in your film actually in the.
He was in my film on Blair, yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard Peter Hitchens speak highly of him, so I know that he's got some kind of morals. And
he's an honest guy, yeah. Chris, I need to wind it up because there's apparently a huge logjam of callers. Thanks very much for your call. Let's go to Michael in Poland.
Hello, George.
Hello, Michael.
It's been a long time since we spoke. I'm glad to speak to you again. You probably don't remember me, that's okay. This, as you know, and I don't want to waste your time, I'll try and get to the point as quickly as possible.
Okay.
This week has been so big, and the topic that struck me in the last couple of days watching all the news coverage is about unity and division, and how this whole topic of Brexit has divided and been so fractional and divisive, but yet uniting across party borders and across left and right. And you talked about earlier how you thought that your opponents are across you in the House,
and the enemy is sitting all around you. Yeah,
but it's like Brexit has made that a spider's web. And
it's a good metaphor. Yeah,
was and is, at least I think I am, still an avid Brexiter, and so I'm reading from some notes here, so I'll make it quick.
Okay.
I helped convince loads of my friends and opponents and enemies to vote for Brexit for the right reasons, for left reasons.
Yeah.
But what happened in the last few days has given me cause to worry that maybe I was wrong. I feel really conflicted about it.
Tell me, what are give me the top two of those.
The result, the end results may be not what we wanted.
Well, it's not over till the fat lady sings, as they say, Michael.
I know, George, and that's what I was.
Let me just appeal to you on one basis. If you look at the 500-page deal, look for the bit on state aid. The deal is there can be no state aid.
I'm not trying to cut you off, and I'm not trying to disagree with you. I realise I only have a few minutes to say what I said, but that I feel justified in my opinion about the whole thing, precisely because of the division in the UK parliamentary system at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's precisely because of that I wanted to say that we have the situation where, through our democratic process, both the Conservative Party, through their own measures, are looking to remove Theresa May. The Labour Party are looking to remove Theresa May's government. But what struck me as most justifying for my position about Brexit is that there is no movement for the people of Europe, or then there's no mechanism for the people of Europe to remove the European Commission, or the commissioners, or the Council of Leaders, or the ECOFIN group.
I honestly don't think that can be done, because there is no democracy in the European Union with relation to those that govern us. It'll have to be done country by country. Good call, Michael. Don't be a stranger and call back soon. After this, it's Grayson in Caterham.
I want to break free from your lies, yeah, so
how wonderful. What a brilliant choice. Whoever nominated that. Let's go quickly, though, because time is marching. Grayson is in Caterham. Go ahead, Grayson.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Just wanted to give a couple of thoughts about the Brexit nonsense that we've seen this week. And one thought was, how can cabinet ministers be expected to read a draft agreement of 585 pages containing multiple cross-references in an hour and then go in for a one-to-one interview with the
Prime very good point. And in fact, the Brexit secretary, as was Dominic Raab, Dominic Raab, he hadn't read it either. That's why he resigned, because a lot of the stuff in it was bounced on him.
Yeah, it's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
It's a very good point. And by the way, when she came out into Downing Street and said that she had cabinet agreement, she could only say that because she refused to have a vote. McVeigh twice demanded a vote on the matter, and Theresa May refused it. And the chief whip says, we don't do votes in the cabinet. What kind of cabinet is that?
I know. It's an incredible situation. An incredible situation that then everybody, all MPs who haven't even seen the agreement, start spouting off about it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing.
But the longer, I've now read it all. The longer you read it, the more you find in it to disagree with. Grayson, thanks for your call. Excellent call, mate. Christine in Warrington says there's an alternative Brexit deal we could have, and it's not too late. David Davis's Canada Plus, which he was pursuing before he was betrayed by Theresa May. She's a Remainer who's selling us out and won't listen to the advice of others. Thanks, Christine in Warrington. Che598 says, remember when we even had politicians who sounded like imperial units, like Michael Foot? Those were the days. Che, you say that as if it's a bad thing. DJ Raw Deal says, George is right. I wouldn't trust the MPs like Gove and Rudd to be genuinely supporting May. They're grovelling with a mind of their own PM aspirations. And Simon Bartle says, this Brexit chaos has already given democracy a severe battering, and another referendum, people's vote, call it what you will, would surely finish democracy off for good. How would we then be viewed as a country by other nations? Well, maybe we'll be viewed, Simon, as a country where the UN has to send special rapporteurs to look at our poverty. I wish there was another hour and a half of this show, but there isn't. John in Glasgow, always worth hearing. Go ahead, John.
George, Daniel earlier on, the MP, is for Brexit, but he's behind the curve on this one. The idea that we can leave with this deal and somehow or other get out and move forward. This deal precludes that. This is the Russian doll deal, which would prevent doing what he hopes to do, which is just get out and then somehow or other move on. We'll be on the rack, tortured forever, endlessly. And
paying for the torture too.
Sorry?
And paying for the torture.
Indeed.
We'll be paying the billions every year until we are given permission by them to leave.
Now, May's got to go. Daniel's got to get on board with the deal. May's got to go. We need a new Prime Minister. My preference would be for Michael Gove. I think he should have got it a way back when. He's the cleverest of them, the most intelligent of them. But everybody plumped for May as the consensus compromise candidate a couple of years ago. And she's delivered blancmange, which is what she always was going to deliver.
It's funny, you took the word right out of my mind there. Blancmange was the reason she got the gig, in my opinion. John in Glasgow, always worth hearing. Thank you. I'm so sorry that we're short of time this evening. Yes, that's the message, at least for some of us, from the European Union. A big thanks to Tony X, the protest board, for all his work with the show this evening. And a big thanks to the 24 backers now of my Killing Kelly film on Kickstarter.com. Let's take a call from James in Rill. Go ahead, James.
Oh, hello, George. How are you?
I'm good. Better for hearing from you. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's been a long time.
Yes.
Well, basically, I want to talk about universal credit, but also Brexit, because they're all in the same milieu, aren't they, really? I'm a councillor up here. I've been a councillor about a year now, but I'm a councillor who's on universal credit myself. Last Friday, I was outside my local job centre with some comrades protesting, as we often do, and meeting people who are on universal credit. And it's just one horror story after another. There's no good news.
Yeah, we did actually do it a couple of weeks ago on the show, and we will be exploring it, James, as we go through this report, the UN report. But, I mean, the horror stories you speak of have been reflected actually tonight and on that previous occasion, and it's not even being fully felt yet, is it?
No, it's not, because what we're talking about is that this is the first phase, basically, of the rollout of universal credit, so people who are claiming new claims. So, of course, the second phase is supposed to be people on existing claims, which was supposed to start at the beginning of next year.
Yeah.
But because of all the terrible publicity for the government, they've kicked that back, haven't they, I think, to the middle of next year to start it.
Yeah. But the ball will be on the slates then, I tell you.
Yeah, I think so. But my residents, I mean, I'm in a very deprived ward, and obviously disproportionately people are affected by universal credit. And
are you in North Wales then? Is Rill in North Wales? Forgive my ignorance.
It is, yeah.
I was going to say I'm speaking in Swansea in January, in Neath actually, but that's probably way out of your way. James, thanks for the call.
Thanks.
And sorry it's short. John, a merchant seaman in Birkenhead, says, George, I for one hope and pray Theresa May is succeeded by Mogg or Boris, as Corbyn would wipe the floor with these silver spoon toffs, and we would at last get the true socialist government we deserve. And Tony X, the aforementioned, says Theresa May stood hard-faced in the House of Commons and at her press conference, displaying intransigence and pig-headedness. Instead of that, she could have employed those skills in the EU negotiations. She would have garnered a lot more UK support. I more and more think her heart wasn't in it, Tone. Let's hear from the legend. That is Damien in Brighton. Go ahead, Damien.
Good evening, George.
Evening.
George, I had a couple of observations I'd like to make. So, I mean, there are a few things that we now know about the EU negotiations. The first and obviously the most important thing is that the Tory proposals do not respect the referendum result, and we know that because so many Tory MPs are telling us that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's two arguments that are being made by the Remain side that I just wanted to quickly address, George.
Sure.
The first is that public opinion has changed on the issue of Brexit. Now, that isn't supported by any other evidence apart from, I believe it was a YouGov telephone poll of 20,000 people, whereas on the other side of the scales, we've got 65% of constituencies voted leave, 17.4 million votes.
Yeah, just last year.
Just last year, George, we had over 80% of voters in the general election voted for pro-Brexit parties. And Tony Blair has popped up again this week, arguing that we should ignore the referendum result. But the Liberal Democrats stood on exactly that platform at the general election. In fact, they made it the centrepiece of their platform. And they lost over 300 deposits and recorded their lowest vote share since 1959. So, you know, Tony Blair's effectively inciting Labour Party members to commit electoral suicide for the Labour Party. And the other argument, the main thrust that they're using, the Remainers, George, is the economic argument. And they're arguing that it would be economically disastrous for the UK economy for us to leave the EU. But if we look at, we're in the EU now, and our economy is in a complete state. We've got highest inequality for 100 years. We have got 200,000 people are going to have been killed by austerity by 2020. We've got child poverty, and we've got a low-wage economy where almost 50% of workers, George, I think it's 43% to be precise, of workers in the UK earn less than £20,000 a year gross. Now, how do you have a consumer economy when half of your workforce has no disposable income?
No disposable income, quite. I mean, the idea that we've done well out of the EU is so far from the truth. It's astounding that they continue to advance it as an argument. It's because the people who are advancing it, they have done well. I saw Gary Lineker opining in the week. Well, if you're earning millions of pounds, much of it from the state public sector, I suppose life looks pretty rosy. Damien, thanks for the call. Kevin's in Stoke. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hello, George.
Hi there. I'm good. Go ahead, sir, quickly.
Thank you. I would have liked to have spoke to your one of your earlier callers. I'm getting the impression as well that you are not a fan of metric, and you would have liked to stay.
Yeah. I know nothing about metric and expect to go to my grave in that mode.
Yeah. Well, I would have liked to have asked
6 feet of earth.
Right.
Not 2 meters or 1.5 meters or whatever that is.
My back garden's a little bit smaller than that. I would have liked to have asked him if we've got a way to measure anything to a higher tolerance than a micron. Since we've converted to metric, that is like 3 decimal places, 1,000th of a millimetre. Now, temperature has to be correct to make measurements. And when you're on about measuring a lump of metal, if we measured a lump of metal from the oven, it would surely be a different size if we measured it when frozen or in Iceland. So how can they state on food packages the weight of food when it's frozen?
Very interesting. I think you and I should go to the Science Museum and look up Roger, who was on earlier. These are all very interesting points, Kevin. Thank you for them. John Locke, though, says, don't punish us scientists with the arbitrary imperial system. The metric system is much better. It's based on increments and powers of 10. It has standardized prefixes with few individual units. We'll fight to keep it! ! He says. And Tom Jarvis says, evening, Steve Barclay, you say, sounds like a bit of a banker to me. I'm surprised that one got past my producers, but it's a very funny one. Councillor James Ball says, growing up in poverty has informed everything I do now as a councillor. Regular pickets at the job centre against sanctions and universal credit for 2 years, volunteering in welfare advice. Now I have an MA in social policy and shortened life expectancy. Mark Adkins says, when May is replaced by a Brexiteer, we could see circumstances where Remainers of all parties are forced to vote the government down to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Oh, the delicious sight of Subri, Cable and Amuna putting Corbyn into number 10 to delay Article 50. Truth Today, UK, if Theresa May fell on her sword now, it would end up in Amber Rudd's bag. Very funny. Georgie says, WASPy women didn't get a mention in the report of the UN Rapporteur press conference. I'll look for that, Georgie. Big supporter, me, of the WASPy women. Dave Farrer says May is arrogant and in denial and not some poor defenceless martyr. She's responsible for countless injustices, including Windrush, but the media have forgotten about that. I must say, the way the media are simpering over Theresa May and her resilience and decency is quite stomach-turning. And John Locke says, Mrs. May conference called with hundreds of... Oh, Mrs. May did a conference call with hundreds of constituents today trying to garner support. Gigi says she'll be out of office by this time next week, even if she wins the vote of no confidence, as she'll have no authority in Parliament, a la Thatcher. And Lee Williams says the fact that the BBC and ITV have not reported the UN's investigation into poverty in Britain is quite frankly a national disgrace. That is our media, that is how people are expected to gain knowledge on current affairs. Shame. And this one is anonymous. No, this is from Stephen. Greetings, Gigi, re-music and 48 letters. Never a more apt tune for you to play than Susie Quattro, 48 Crash. Blessings to you. I must say I've forgotten that one. Marek says, oh, I've done that one. This one is from Ali in Southwark. I couldn't hear most of the first half hour of tonight's show without going off topic. Has anyone raised the other important issue of Ruthless Rudd appointed as Work and Pensions Secretary? With existing harsh sanctions and DWP measures already in place, it's unimaginable what Amber Rudd will add. And Dan says May is on the cliff edge, so I'm expecting an anti-Corbyn slur from the Blairites in 5, 4, 3, 2. And last one, I think, from Joe. I've had it with that lot. The EU pull up the drawbridge and let them get on with it. As for the kids, there's plenty of places they can go outside of the EU for their stag do's and hen parties. We can still go. It's going to be visa-free travel, whether there's a deal or no deal. Thank you to everyone who tried to get through. My apologies if you did not. Thanks for all the mail. My apologies if I didn't yet get to read it out. And thank you to the now 27 backers of my film On the Strange Death of David Kelly, Kickstarter.com. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, same place. And stay tuned for the surreally brilliant Ian Lee, who's on right after this.
I think we're